Good Monday. We are coming on the air with the aftermath of a deadly weekend. Shootings across the country, including in Philadelphia, where police just gave us an update on the suspected shooters who sent bystanders running for their lives after several shots were fired into the street, killing 3 people, just one of at least 13 mass shootings over the weekend. Plus, the Justice Department's latest attempts to get its hands on a Russian oligarch's asset. This time, 2 planes, including one of the most expensive private jets in the world. And one of the biggest stars in the world in sports pushing for the release of WNBA star Brittney Griner from a Russian jail. Will King James support help free her? Also ahead, former President Trump has proven he has an impact on the elections. But are his endorsements wearing a bit thin, even in his own party? We're going to take a look. And the battle brewing between Starbucks and union activists, the lengths some say the company has gone to get rid of unionized workers. Hey there, I'm Tom Costello for Hallie, and we are expecting a vote any day now on exactly what we're going to be seeing with the House of Representatives on a package of new gun legislation, as families across the country are reeling from yet another deadly weekend of mass shootings in America. At least 12 people were killed, 54 injured in 13 mass shootings across the country just this weekend. In Philadelphia, bystanders were sent running for their lives after police said multiple people opened fire in the city's entertainment district, leaving 3 people dead, 12 injured. And late tonight, we're learning that Philadelphia police have a person of interest in custody. In Chattanooga, Tennessee, 11 people were injured, 3 people died, 2 from gunshot wounds, 1 after being hit by a car following a shooting outside of a nightclub there. The city's police chief says no one has been arrested. And in Somerton, South Carolina, 1 person died, 7 injured after a drive-by shooting at a high school graduation party. It comes after we had already a deadly Memorial Day weekend, 13 killed, 17 mass shootings across the country. In total, that's now 33 mass shootings just since the horrific school shooting we saw in Uvalde just 2 weeks ago. That according to the Gun Violence Archive, which defines a mass shooting as 4 or more people shot, not including the shooter. All of it further increasing the pressure on lawmakers to come to some sort of an agreement on gun legislation. That group of bipartisan senators really has been working behind closed doors for a week now. And the Democrat spearheading the talks spoke with NBC's Chuck Todd just before we came on the air.
If we pass something along the lines of what we are contemplating, every single person who votes for it will be running on it. We will pass something that is broadly popular.
All right, joining us now live, Emily Ikeda and Garrett Haag. But let's start with Emily. Emily, give us a sense on the latest on this investigation where you are in Philadelphia. What did the assistant DA have to say?
Hey, Tom, good to be with you. The assistant district attorney describing just how complicated of an investigation this is for a number of reasons. The first being this street, South Street here, was a sea of people Saturday night. Hundreds of people were out and about when bullets started to fly. The other thing to consider is they say that the crime scene is about 2 blocks long, and they're looking at almost 4 different sections of that. And the reason being is because the investigators say that this started as a physical fight, a brawl that snowballed into so much more. It escalated to involving guns, involving at least 4 people at this time. That's what we're hearing. We know one of the first gunmen, one of the first shooters, was killed, and we're now learning from the district attorney's office that they have approved 2 arrest warrants, the first being for another alleged gunman. He's being identified as Griner. Police say that he had left a ghost gun at the scene with an extended magazine. And just to give you some background information on this, police had been patrolling this area on foot, South Street. They had ramped up patrols in the area, knowing that there were large events in Philadelphia throughout the weekend. And so when the shooting broke out, they were able to quickly arrive and immediately began treating people. And then what they noticed was actually an active shooter who police say was Griner. And so they say he turned and looked at him, and so they started firing at Griner, and they struck his hand. The other person I'll make mention of, we don't have a name for that other person who has the arrest warrant approved for, and not much information. But of course, as we learn more details in the coming days, we'll be sure to bring it to you, Tom.
Okay, Emily, thank you very much. Let's go now to Garrett Haag on Capitol Hill. Garrett, let's talk about where this legislation is going on Capitol Hill. We know that a ban on assault weapons is off the table, and so are universal background checks. So what is still on the table?
Well, I just had this conversation with John Cornyn, the Republican senator who's negotiating with Chris Murphy, and they both outlined 4 broad areas that they're trying to hit on here. They talked about strengthening background checks, not expanding them, which seems like splitting hairs here, but trying to make sure the existing background check system works better, including perhaps by looking at juvenile records. So in the case of perhaps the shooter in Uvalde, his juvenile record could have become relevant and prevented him from buying the gun used in that shooting. Let's also talk about incentivizing states to improve their red flag laws or to put them in place. And there's also sort of unspecified measures here dealing with mental health and school security. Those are the pieces that the Republican lawmakers want. Tom, these negotiations are very tenuous at this hour, but those 2 senators, Chris Murphy and John Cornyn, are sitting down for a private dinner tonight. They're going to keep those negotiations going. Both have said things have gone farther and have been more serious than at any other time in which they have tried to find some kind of compromise on this issue.
Okay, but obviously all of this goes nowhere if they can't get 10 GOP votes to overcome a Republican filibuster. Do they think that they have the votes this time?
It's going to depend on what they actually put on paper, and I would actually argue it won't be a question of 60. It'll probably be 70 or no vote at all. And I say that because if there is a deal to be had here with John Cornyn, who sits right in the middle of the Republican conference politically, if he's on board with something that Democrats are on board with, there are probably 15 Republican senators to the left of Cornyn, if that makes any sense, on this issue. So if he's on board, I think the numbers are there. If he's not on board, you wouldn't even see a vote, because you would have potentially, nothing specific to bring forward that would be new.
You are a pro of watching Capitol Hill. What's your gut tell you right now, Garrett?
I am pessimistic until proven otherwise, but the tone and tenor of these conversations are different than ones I have covered, all of which have only led to failure. So we'll see where this goes. I think we'll have a much better picture by the end of the week.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Garrett, appreciate all of your reporting. And Emily, thank you very much. And while lawmakers scramble to come up with an agreement on gun legislation in Washington, President Biden hosting a summit of the Americas this week in Los Angeles for the first time, and listen to this, 30 years, but only one day in, and the administration is already doing a little bit of damage control after excluding Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua from this regional meeting, which led the Mexican President Obrador to say thanks, but no thanks. He's boycotting the meeting, instead sending Mexico's foreign minister in his place. A senior U.S. administration official says the non-invites were expected, as the U.S. has reservations about human rights in those countries. The spotlight also turning on Vice President Harris and her most difficult task so far, tackling the root cause of immigration, the surge into the southern U.S. border. Joining me right now, Mike Memoli. So, Mike, the White House says the U.S. was in charge of the invitations, and they were in communication with other countries about whether to invite Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. President Obrador is not coming. This seems to undermine the very purpose of the summit.
Yeah, Tom, it's certainly an embarrassment for the Biden administration before the summit even begins. But really, this question over who would be invited and who would actually attend in the end has been one that's been looming over the summit for some time. So what the administration is hoping that today serves is that rip the Band-Aid moment finally is over, that now they can focus to the important business of the summit. But it is interesting because at the heart of this is a real fundamental disagreement between the U.S. and some of our allies about what the summit is even supposed to be about. The U.S. views this as a summit of democracies, and as part of that summit, they do not want to invite dictators like Raul Castro, like Maduro in Venezuela, to attend this function. We also know, Tom, that politically it would be incredibly difficult for President Biden, even within his own party, to have those dictators present here. So what the White House is now saying is, first of all, yes, we understand that AMLO, the Mexican president, is not going to be attending, but he's coming to the White House next month. Mexico's still represented here. They're still coming to the table with some real commitments, but also that there will be representatives from Venezuela, from Cuba, from Nicaragua, just not from their governments. They want to help empower some of the pro-democracy forces in those countries, and they'll be attending the summit, just not the dictators of those countries.
Mike, thanks. One more question, though, for you. A lot of foreign policy focus for the president has been on China, the U.S. troop withdrawal in Afghanistan, the war in Ukraine. So where does the focus turn at the summit?
Yeah, what's interesting about this, Tom, is when I covered Biden as the vice president, he used to joke that, you know, the Western Hemisphere is my hemisphere. President Obama assigned me to deal with it. And so he built relationships with a lot of the major countries in the Western Hemisphere. Now, a lot of those leaders have turned over since Biden was vice president. But what they really wanted to use this summit was to really reinforce the idea that, yes, the U.S. has got a migration problem at the border. Republicans have been really seizing on this. But this is a problem with regional causes, and it has regional solutions. So they really wanted to focus, and this is what Vice President Harris will be doing in the days leading up to Biden's arrival here on Wednesday, focusing on private sector commitments, things that they're doing to invest in these Central American countries particularly, also what the governments there are investing in their own resources as well. That's what they want the focus of this summit to be, but obviously a lot of the focus is going to be elsewhere, especially about who's not here.
Yep, absolutely. Mike, thanks very much. All right, the White House today released a memo saying another overseas flight bringing in more than 1 million, make that 1.5 million 8-ounce bottles worth of imported baby formula is on its way now to the U.S., should arrive Thursday. It comes just days after Abbott Nutrition, the largest producer of baby formula in the country, restarted production at its plant in Michigan. The current baby formula crisis that has been plaguing the nation escalated 4 months ago when the Abbott's Michigan plant shut down. FDA inspectors said they found a type of bacteria dangerous to babies that led to a massive recall of the company's formula, exacerbating an already tight market that was impacted by supply chain issues and the pandemic. Abbott reopened over the weekend. Jesse Kirsch is in Sturgis, Michigan at the plant. Jesse, so Abbott says it'll start by ramping up the production of EleCare and other specialty formulas for infants with food allergies. Walk us through the timeline. How quickly will that be on store shelves?
Yeah, and Tom, as you mentioned, this place has been shut down for quite a while. So February was when they stopped producing formula here, and they restarted, according to Abbott, on Saturday. So this is not like a flip of a switch kind of situation. What we know from Abbott is that they are expecting to begin with the release of EleCare. That's a hypoallergenic formula, and that they are expecting to happen around June 20th. So there's two things that stick out there to me, and I've asked Abbott in follow-up. We've been reaching out to them, trying to get some clarity on what exactly that release to consumers looks like. Does that mean that's when the trucks are leaving the plant here? Does that mean that's when it will get to store shelves? We don't have an answer on that yet. And also pointing out, they say around June 20th. So they don't even have a firm date there, because obviously this is a very fluid situation, but certainly a sign of hope for families, because as you mentioned, when this plant shut down, it took an already looming shortage and made it far worse, it appears. And right now we're looking at a national out of stock rate, according to Data Assembly, of near 75%. So any help is big help.
75% out of stock. Okay. FDA investigators, though, I guess they're on site there. They've been there for a few days now, overseeing this process. So talk about some of the requirements that the company has to meet to stay open with the FDA on site.
Yeah, we know recently that the FDA has had its teams here. They say they've been here to inspect. We also know that part of the stipulations of the consent decree that was entered between the FDA and Abbott Nutrition required that the company bring in an outside independent inspector, someone, an expert who would be overseeing sanitation, environmental testing, and also dry out procedures. So all of the things that are involved at a plant like this, that had to be overseen by an outside independent expert, and that expert's report, according to the FDA, has to get to the federal regulator. So before this plant could reopen, as we understand it, Abbott Nutrition had to present this independent expert's report to the federal government, and Abbott says it has met its initial requirements to begin production here again. But of course, there's scrutiny facing the federal government as well for its response to what has unfolded here, Tom.
Okay, Jesse, thanks very much. Jesse Kirsch in Michigan. We turn now to Ukraine, where for the first time in weeks, Russian forces fired off missiles at Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. No one was killed in the attack, and while one of the missiles was destroyed, 4 of them did hit infrastructure targets. It comes as President Putin is threatening to attack new targets altogether if Western countries keep supplying Ukraine with long-range missiles. Putin says Moscow would be ready to hit, quote, objects that we haven't yet struck, But the West seems undeterred. Just today, the UK announcing it will be giving Ukraine those very long-range weapons to fight back, especially in the eastern region of the country. Those rockets can hit targets up to 50 miles away, and they are very, very similar to the rockets the U.S. said it is also giving Ukraine. NBC's Ali Rusi is in Kyiv. Ali, some people had actually been returning to Kyiv for the first time since the invasion, and now we're hearing about this new attack on the capital. How much is the capital under threat, and are people rattled?
Hi, Tom. That's right. Life had gone back to semi-normality here. Shops had opened up. People are on the streets. And this attack certainly shattered that sense of calm that's existed here in Kyiv for over a month now. The last attack was on the 29th of April. And people don't feel that safe, especially as the threats that Putin is putting out there. But compared to the east, this is still a very safe place. We managed to talk to one lady who'd escaped Mariupol. She's here in Kyiv now. Let's take a listen to what she had to say about that rocket attack. Were you surprised there was an attack in Kyiv again after so long?
Мы немножко успокоились. Уже думаем, как-то сказали, что Киев все равно накрыт каким-то куполом, а здесь такое, и опять переживать.
Are they scared here in Kyiv as well?
Ну, не так, как там было.
And the feeling amongst these folks, Tom, is that at some point more attacks are going to come to Kyiv because Putin has been warning that he will hit fresh targets, and a likely target is the capital.
Yeah, so let's talk about these new advanced weapons the West has given Ukraine. The Pentagon said that it could take weeks to actually get them into the place on the battlefield where they mattered. So two questions. How critical are they to the fight right now? And also, we've heard a lot about the fact that a lot of new technology arrives, but the Ukrainian military doesn't know how to operate the high-tech equipment that they're receiving. Can you talk to that?
That's right. Look, the Ukrainians say that these new missiles that are coming their way are going to tip the scales into their favor. They say that it's going to push the Russians away from the front line. But as you mentioned, they're about 3 weeks away from the battlefield. Ukrainians are being trained on them at an undisclosed location, and anything could happen in 3 weeks, Tom. This is a fierce battle. The Russians are pounding the eastern front. So 3 weeks is a long time. But the Ukrainians say this is essential to push the Russians away from that eastern front, and the governor of the Luhansk area said that once they get them, they'll hit the Russians, and then the Russians will be on the run. We'll have to see if that happens once they're in play.
Okay, Ali, can I ask you a bigger picture question here? I've been wondering this. This war has caused so much suffering and loss, but it seems like Russia could have gone even further if it wanted to. We are not seeing the kind of carpet bombing we saw in World War II or Vietnam. Is there any sense that Russia is holding back, that it's not going full throttle, or at least to the maximum that it could?
Well, if you look at the Eastern Front, they're certainly not holding back there. Look, they spread themselves very thin at the beginning of this war, and they had to regroup and re-strategize. But what they're doing in Severodonetsk is very hardcore. I mean, they are bombing that place morning, noon, and night. You speak to residents of Severodonetsk, and they're saying this is turning into a kind of a Mariupol for them. The place is being hit really hard. The Russians are throwing everything they have at it. So it's not as if they're backing out, but they're concentrating their attacks in key locations so they don't suffer the losses that they did last time. Their attack on Kyiv was an unmitigated disaster last time, and I think they've learned lessons from that. And the fear here is that if they do take the Eastern Front and they can move their front line further west, then those targets that they were hitting 2 months ago will again be key targets for the Russians.
Boy, we're really lucky to have you there. Thanks, Ali. Appreciate the perspective. Thanks very much. The Justice Department moving today to seize 2 jets belonging to the Russian billionaire Romanov Abramovich. You're looking at the 2 planes, a Gulfstream and a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. Right now, that 787 is in Dubai and the Gulfstream is in Russia. That 787 reported to be one of the most expensive private jets in the world, valued at $350 million. This is all part of DOJ's Operation Klepto Capture, focused on focused on legally taking Russian oligarchs' access after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Tom Winter is on the deck with us. So, Tom, we've already seen Abramovich sanctioned by the UK, the EU, and Canada, but not by the U.S. So why now, and what's next?
Well, the Justice Department and a senior Justice Department official briefing reporters this afternoon, Tom, made it clear this is about a couple of different things. First off, the muscular enforcement of sanctions, though, to your point, he's not sanctioned here. He's sanctioned elsewhere. And number two, sending another message to those close to Vladimir Putin, which is you have a choice. You can continue to be close to him. You can continue to be part of a Russia that is escalating its attacks and doing the things in Ukraine that Ali just laid out for us. Or you can leave that regime and perhaps you won't lose your tremendous amounts of wealth. I mean, Tom, you know better than anybody, the 787, one of the most technologically advanced commercial airliners in the sky today, delivered green to Abramovich, which means you got the fuselage, the wings, the engine, and the controls, and nothing else. And then he outfitted it to the point that is believed to be valued at $350 million, making it, as you said, one of the most valued and most expensive personal yachts on the planet. So that's kind of the focus today, is sending a message to those close to Russia that as it escalates and furthers its invasion, you're going to be in trouble financially.
Yeah, so the Wall Street Journal reporting that President Zelensky had asked the U.S. not to sanction Abramovich because of its role in peace talks. So what more do we know about his involvement on that front, the peace talk front?
Right. So there's been no indication now for several months that he's been involved in that, Tom. We haven't heard that ourselves here at NBC News. It hasn't been further reported elsewhere. So I think it's important, one, to note that. Two, the U.S. is clearly sending a message. We really don't have to sanction you. We have all sorts of other rules and regulations that have real teeth to them, and now we're going to start enforcing it. By the way, we've got a whole team devoted to it, a whole team that will look at your 5 shell companies in Cyprus and other places around the world, even as he tried to move, allegedly, his assets to his children. We will see through those. And I think one of the most important parts of today's briefing, Tom, was the tremendous amount of private sector, those that might normally facilitate these transactions, the amount of private sector cooperation that is being given to Operation Klepto Capture in the Justice Department, given this war and given what's going on.
That's fascinating. Okay, Tom, thanks. Tom Winter. Now to the UK, where Prime Minister Boris Johnson just narrowly survived a confidence vote from his party. 211 members voted for him, 148 voted against him. This means the Prime Minister will stay on his job as Prime Minister for now. According to Conservative Party rules, he is safe from challenge for another year, but those rules can and have been changed before. Over 15% of his party wanted this vote. That came after an investigation found a culture of partying and socializing among the Prime Minister's staff during different stages of UK's COVID lockdowns. Stephanie Gosk is in London. So, Stephanie, we're seeing the party now declare that they have confidence in the Prime Minister, but this was a rather close vote, right? So what's the takeaway? Is his future still doomed, or is he in trouble?
Well, you know, if you look at those numbers, Tom, 211 to 148, that's about a 60-40 split. And in U.S. politics terms, that's kind of a landslide victory, right? And Boris Johnson saw it that way himself today. Here's what he had to say. Listen to this.
It's a convincing result, a decisive result, and what it means is that as a government we can move on and focus on the stuff that I think really matters. I'm grateful for the support that they've given me.
But here's the problem with that. The problem is that this is his own party that voted, and 40% of his party in Parliament doesn't support him. They want to kick him out, and that can make life very difficult. And there's precedent here as well, Tom. You had the Prime Minister Theresa May also faced a no-confidence vote. She actually was more successful than Boris Johnson in this one, and just months later, she decided she couldn't stay in office and stepped down. Tom?
I like the theme music back there, Stephanie. Thank you for that. Can we talk, though, about what his future may hold? Because, as you mentioned, you know, it is his own party, and he's only got 60% support. I heard somebody earlier on the news saying any prime minister who has faced a no-confidence vote, even if they narrowly survive, they don't have a long political future. What do you think?
Yeah, Tom, it's tough, and not just because of this serenading music out here from protesters. It is going to be a tough road. And you know, the situation, the climate right now in the UK looks a lot like it does in the US. There's low unemployment, but inflation is skyrocketing, and people are unhappy about it. Within his party, they're unhappy that he just increased taxes against oil and gas companies. That's to try to alleviate the burden on the average Brit. But really, it's difficult here. Life is difficult, and that is how you are judged as a politician. So it will be a real uphill battle, but he seems to have more than 9 lives, this guy, so we'll see what's ahead, Tom.
Yeah, he does. All right, one more question for you. Labor doesn't have a particularly strong prime minister candidate right now, or a shadow prime minister. So what's the future for the Conservative Party then? Yes, Boris Johnson has won this no confidence vote. What's the future for the Conservative Party?
Well, there are a number of people who aren't necessarily clamoring openly, Tom, because that wouldn't be right. But one name that's being bandied about is the current foreign secretary, and she could possibly rise up if he were to step down. But listen, you know, Boris Johnson's a stubborn guy, and he certainly sounded determined today, and looks like he's ready for the battle. So we'll have to see. Tom?
Stephanie Gosk with her traveling band right there outside of number 10. Thank you very much, Steph. Coming up, some of the biggest names in basketball are pushing the Biden administration to bring Brittney Griner home. The WNBC star has been detained in Russia for more than 100 days, the latest on her case. Plus, a big mystery over a big problem right now in Europe. People there report getting pricked by needles at nightclubs. What law enforcement is telling clubgoers to look out for. That's coming up. Back on NBC News Now with the 5 things our team thinks you should know about. Number 1, new charges for Enrique Tarrio and 4 other members of the Proud Boys. A federal grand jury indicted them on seditious conspiracy charges related to the January 6th attack. This indictment alleges Tarrio knew of discussions around a plan to storm the Capitol and that he was part of discussions about occupying government buildings. Number 2, state lawmakers in Nigeria say a gunman opened fire and detonated explosives at a Catholic church in the southwestern part of the country on Sunday. Dozens of people are feared dead, including children. This happened in one of Nigeria's most peaceful states. It's not clear who was behind the attack. Number 3, today, thousands of workers in the UK started a 4-day workweek trial. No cut to their pay. The pilot program will reportedly last for 6 months and involves more than 3,000 workers, 70 companies. The group organizing this experiment says the goal is to work 80% of the usual work week in exchange for 100% productivity. Number 4, Elon Musk threatening to back out of his $44 billion deal to buy Twitter. He is accusing the company of resisting and thwarting his right to information about fake accounts before he buys it. His lawyer sent a letter to the Twitter board saying it's breaching the buyout agreement and he has the right not to complete the deal. Number 5, have you seen it? Top Gun Maverick soaring again at the box office over the weekend. It came out only less than 2 weeks ago, but has reportedly brought in more than $500 million globally so far. All right, a strange new crime trend. Nightclub needle attacks are puzzling police across Europe. In recent months, there have been hundreds of people reportedly being pricked out of the blue with needles at nightclubs and concerts. On Sunday, French prosecutors charged a 20-year-old man in southern France in connection with a fresh spate of needle attacks. Doctors and multiple prosecutors are on the case, but there are many unanswered questions. No one knows why this is happening, who is behind the spike in attacks, and whether the victims have been injected with drugs or some other substance. NBC News correspondent Megan Fitzgerald has the latest on the story from Paris.
Yeah, Yeah, this is a major concern here for law enforcement officials in France. They say that they have received more than 350 cases since March, half of those in just the last month. Now, clubgoers who have been victims of these attacks report feeling experiences like vertigo. They've had symptoms like dizziness. Some have fainted and passed out, nausea. But here's what they're trying to do to try and stop this from happening. We know that clubs and nightclubs are strengthening their security. We know that they are patting people down, looking for sharp objects as well as needles. But here's the thing. When these cases are reported, doctors say it may be too late because they're not finding any trace of a substance inside these folks' bodies. And so it's a real mystery for law enforcement officials, and it's a big concern for people who are going out. Take a listen.
Every night that I go out, people are talking about it. Okay, have you heard about the news? And it creates distance between people. You kind of are more afraid to come to somebody new. Maybe they will be the person with the needle, and so, yeah, it sucks.
This isn't just an issue here in France. The Netherlands, as well as England and Belgium, they're also investigating cases. Back to you.
Yeah, thanks. In fact, I have family members in Belgium, and their kids have been out to parties and concerts, and the same thing has happened there. They were all talking about it. All right, gas prices hitting new record highs. Some stations are charging, get this, almost $10 a gallon. The impact this might have at the polls as people get ready for a big primary day when we come back. Yeah, you don't need us to tell you, right? The price of gas just keeps going up and up. Now averaging $4.87 a gallon nationally. California already well above that. $6.34 a gallon on average in that state. But in Mendocino, California, $10 a gallon almost there, while at many stations in L.A., more than $8 a gallon. And that could have an impact with voters in Tuesday's primaries. An ABC News poll found the three biggest factors for voters are the economy, inflation, and gas prices. And, of course, that's all wrapped into one. We are not alone, though. Take a look at this. Canada's average per gallon right now, about $6.50. While in the UK, it's over $8. Look at Hong Kong, $11.21 is the average. Venezuela, dirt cheap there. It'll run you a mere 8 cents a gallon. They are the cheapest anywhere on the planet, but they are sitting on top of one massive oil well. Speaking of the primaries, California is one of 7 states holding elections tomorrow, so we may start to see what impact gas prices are having at the polls. There's also the question of the power of former President Trump. This week, the committee investigating the January 6th attack will hold its first public hearings. An NBC News poll shows the House Select Committee may have some work to do with the public. Right now, just 45% of Americans say Donald Trump is solely or mainly responsible for the insurrection, the riot. That's down from a poll taken just days after the attack, when 52% of people said the president was mainly responsible. Jonathan Allen joins me now to talk about all of this. So, John, the poll seems to suggest time has been on former President Trump's side. Do you think that these hearings could sway public opinion already, or are we already baked into our preconceived ideas about this whole attack to begin with?
It's a great question, Tom. The reason for public hearings is to try to sway public opinion. If it weren't for that, we wouldn't have all the cameras, all the lights on. The members of Congress on this January 6th committee want to use the evidence that they've found in this public setting to try to move those numbers, to try to get more Republicans and independents, certainly in a place where they look at January 6th the way that most Democrats still do, and certainly moved toward a prosecution. But if they didn't care about public opinion, if they only cared about a legal case or setting up the Justice Department, they could do all of that, privately, or certainly not in prime time.
Okay, so let's talk about President Trump's influence in some of the races down the road. So just last week in Wisconsin, Mr. Trump snubbed former Lieutenant Governor and GOP favorite Rebecca Kleefisch and instead endorsed outsider Tim Michels for governor ahead of the August primary. In Nevada, next week, the Trump-endorsed candidate for the Senate is facing a tough fight. So what's the state of play when it comes to the former president's influence right now on the GOP?
Yeah, our colleague Natasha Korecki just wrote about this, that because of some of these endorsements, there are folks in states across the country that are basically saying former President Trump should stay out That said, he's still the singular dominant force in Republican primary politics. He's made roughly 200 endorsements. The vast majority of them that have already seen primary elections have won, and yet several high-profile candidates have lost. I think it'd be fair to say both that he remains that big singular dominant force in the party and also perhaps a little bit of his influence has diminished.
Okay, let's go back to California. Voters across that state, very blue state, are also concerned about the economy, just like the rest of the United States. Do we think that this will impact any races in California with the highest gas prices in the nation?
Tom, it certainly could, in that what you have in California in the primaries, unlike many states, is what they call a jungle primary. So the Democrats, the Republicans, and any independent candidates all run in the same mix. So it's it's possible to see that in a way that you might not in an only Democratic primary or only Republican primary. That said, it's not something that we've seen necessarily as the top issue in the most competitive congressional races. We do have a lot of interesting things on the ballot tomorrow in California, including that LA mayor's race with current Congresswoman Karen Bass and Rick Caruso, who's been spending a ton of money there. So that should be interesting to watch.
All right, good. John, thank you very much. Later tonight, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee will be holding a rally for WNBA star Brittney Griner in her hometown of Houston. Griner has been held in Russia since February after a search of her luggage turned up vape cartridges containing cannabis oil. Last month, the State Department said her case has been classified as wrongly detained. The NBA is also stepping up its support. LeBron James tweeting, quote, "We need to come together and help do whatever we possibly can to bring BG home quickly and safely." And the Boston Celtics wore "We Are BG" T-shirts at their practice before last night's NBA Finals game against the Warriors. Let's bring in Katie Beck right now. Katie, tonight Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee says she wants Griner to know that her community is standing behind her and beside her with the goal of pressuring the White House, I guess, right, to prioritize her case.
Absolutely. They're hoping those voices reach well beyond Houston, Tom. They want the Biden administration to be paying attention to this. She is a Houston native, and frankly, it has been almost 4 months that she has been detained in Russia. The vast majority of that were sort of detained in silence. We didn't really know where her case was going and if there would be a fair legal process. At first, the Biden administration kind of stayed silent on this, as did the State Department, just saying that they were offering the support that they do any American who is detained abroad. And then things sort of heated up when they said she was wrongfully detained. She is facing 10 years behind bars for this offense. That is a very serious consequence given the nature of the infraction. So I think what this grand rally and vigil that's planned for tonight outside the Toyota Center in Houston is meant to say is we've really got to start applying pressure to this, getting that name out there, and making clear that 4 months is too long.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, she allegedly had cannabis oil in her vape cartridges, right? She wasn't smuggling marijuana or coke or anything like that. Why are we seeing an increase now? Why do we see the WNBA and the NBA stepping up the pressure now?
I think at first there was this hesitancy that maybe that they needed to do an investigation. There were actually, as you said, just traces of cannabis oil found in those vape cartridges. So it wasn't actually even cannabis oil that she was transporting. It was traces of it that were left in cartridges in her luggage. So I think at first they were hoping that perhaps there was a diplomatic way to resolve this and they would not have to escalate to some legal avenues to get the State Department involved. But it very quickly became clear that as this judge continues to extend the detaining of her in Russia, this case is not going away, and they don't have any plans immediately to let her go.
And we should make the point, this is what the Russians allege, right? We don't know this for sure. This is what the Russian prosecutors say. Listen, one more thing to you now. Griner is said to be getting emails and letters while she's in her Russian jail cell. Talk to us about that communication. What happens next in her case? Do we know?
Yeah, it's sort of a surprising twist because typically, as we've seen in past cases, there is sort of a silence or a vacuum that happens when people get detained in Russia. They don't have a lot of open communication with, the outside world. Apparently, there have been multiple WNBA players that have been sending letters and emails, hundreds of them, to her as she has been sitting in jail. And she's been responding to some of them. Some of these players said they were shocked to get a return letter from her. Now, what she's saying in the letter is that basically the Russians are screening everything she's writing, that she's putting something down, they are taking a photograph of it, translating it, screening it. So, how honest is that communication? It's hard to say because obviously everything is being monitored by the Russians. But in this particular case, it is a bit rare that we would see someone in her situation that is able to communicate back and forth with people here in the United States. Where does it go from here? I mean, I think the Biden administration is going to be facing a lot of vocal advocates in Houston and around the world saying, what are we doing to try and get this girl home? Yeah. This doesn't seem like the punishment fits the crime.
No, and it's a Russian jail cell. Can't be worse. Katie, thank you very much. Katie Beck reporting there. Still to come, a Starbucks in upstate New York is closing, and the union backing organizing efforts at the coffee chain says it's retaliation. How workers at that store are reacting. Coming up next in The Original. NBC News covers hundreds of stories each day, and because you couldn't possibly read, watch, or listen to all of them, who can? Our Bureau items have already done it for you. Our teams have itemized it all. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment that we like to call The Local. From our Midwest Bureau, a judge delayed the trial of two former Minneapolis officers charged in George Floyd's killing until January. Tu Tao and J. Alexander King were expected to go on trial next Monday on charges of aiding and abetting second-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter. The judge said he moved it to give them a better chance at a fair trial. From our West Coast Bureau, police in Southern California say a teenager they arrested for threatening a school shooting on social media. He also had a ghost gun. Those are guns made by assembling pieces, and they're often sold in a kit. 17 years old, he was charged with criminal threats, possession of brass knuckles, and possession of an unregistered gun. Also from our West Coast Bureau, rescuers found a missing 4-year-old boy in Montana. Look at that face. 2 days after he went missing near his home, they said they found this little guy in good condition, except that he was hungry and thirsty after spending 2 days outside on his own. They found him about 2.5 miles away from where he was last seen. They took him to a nearby medical center for evaluation. He looks good there. Now we want to bring you today's original with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been keeping an eye on. We've talked a lot about unions recently. Big companies like Amazon, Starbucks, and Apple are facing union pushes really across the country. Starbucks is now facing another union battle after the coffee giant announced it's shutting down its cafe in Ithaca, New York. Shutting down. That just voted to unionize back in April. The union believes the closure is a form of retaliation. Now, this is the latest escalation between the national labor movement and Starbucks. NBC News correspondent Isa Gutierrez has the latest.
Outrage over Starbucks store closure. The workers' union at the coffee giant claiming the company is illegally closing one of its recently unionized stores in Ithaca, New York, to retaliate against its workers' activist efforts.
I was shocked.
They read a statement about how they were closing because they couldn't deliver us the partner experience and business needs.
The store closing its doors a week later on June 10th, almost 2 months to the day after employees there voted yes to unionize. In an email to NBC News, a spokesperson for Starbucks said, quote, "We have fully honored the process laid out by the NLRB and encouraged our partners to exercise their right to vote in the election to have their voices heard. Any claims of union busting are categorically false."
Between health insurance and Starbucks paying for a lot of people's college through ASU, losing those hours and losing that job would mean losing all of that.
Workers at over 100 Starbucks locations across 26 states have voted to unionize since December 2021. The closure in Ithaca, the latest escalation in the growing battle between Starbucks and the national labor movement, a movement that's reared its head at online retail giant Amazon this year as well.
Starbucks has engaged in one of the fiercest and most brutal anti-union campaigns that's happened in labor history.
Workers United filed an unfair labor practice charge against the company with the National Labor Relations Board on Friday, alleging Starbucks is closing the store in retaliation to workers unionizing and striking in April.
They think it will send a message to workers everywhere else. If you try to unionize, if you try to speak up for yourselves, this is what's going to happen.
Union efforts from employees at other major companies also making headlines. Most recently, Amazon workers at a Staten Island warehouse voting to unionize in the spring. Today, the National Labor Relations Board hosting a hearing related to those workers' complaint that the company intimidated and interfered when they tried to organize. In a statement to NBC News, a spokesperson for Amazon said the allegations are, quote, without merit, and we look forward to presenting the facts during this week's hearing. In the meantime, recently unionized employees leaning on each other for support.
The level of solidarity has just exceeded my expectations. Even if we take this loss now, it's going to turn back around.
All right, so let's now talk, in fact, to Isa Gutierrez. And Isa, I was just on the website, and this is apparently the Starbucks near the college. So this is a college town in Ithaca, right? The workers union at Starbucks has pushed back on store closures, right?
That's right, on other store closures as well, Tom. So last summer, this workers' union filed similar charges with the NLRB when Starbucks closed stores in Buffalo after their union campaign went public. Now, Ian, the attorney for the union, told me today that the agency will hold a trial addressing those complaints against Starbucks next month. Only time will tell how the NLRB will respond to these new claims with regards to the closure of the Ithaca store. We'll stay on this story. Tom?
Thank you, Issa. Thank you very much. We really want to stay on top of this. Appreciate it. All right, 78 years ago today, 78 years ago, Allied troops stormed the beaches in Normandy. Kerry Sanders went there and spoke with some of the veterans, paying their respects. We're going to hear from them and him in a moment. Today, thousands of people from France and across the world are gathering over in Normandy to celebrate and remember D-Day on its 78th anniversary. It's the first time we're seeing crowds like this in a while because for the last 2 years, D-Day ceremonies were brought down to a minimum due to the COVID restrictions. But this year, crowds are back. We're also seeing dozens of veterans now in their 90s there to pay tribute to U.S. and Allied troops who landed there 78 years ago. Hitler's Nazi Germany had occupied France for 4 years until this massive D-Day invasion liberated France and eventually Europe. But they paid a heavy toll and a cost. Over 4,400 soldiers died. More than 5,000 were injured. Kerry Sanders is in Normandy.
Tom, it is so peaceful here. 78 years ago, D-Day, living hell. What happened with the American and Allied troops coming ashore here is described by those who lived it as horror. Many never even made it to shore. They were still in the water as the Germans fired upon them, killing them. In fact, over my shoulder, you can see the headstones for 9,387 Americans who are buried here. The U.S. landed in Omaha and Codename Beach, Utah. They came ashore along with the Brits, the Canadians. This was a decisive moment, D-Day, because this was occupied France, and it was the effort by the United States and the Allies to liberate this country from the occupation. And that became a critical move past the Battle of the Bulge to ultimately lead to the collapse of Hitler's Germany in Europe. Those who have gathered here, some of them, well, they're D-Day veterans, very old, 99, some 100 years old. We had a chance to walk on the beach with some of them to talk about what it is that they experienced and paying respects to those who died while they survived.
I feel their presence right now. Their souls are right here, witnessing this.
And what are they telling us?
They're telling me, thank you, Jake. Thank you for coming and telling the world that this is where we were killed.
Not far from here, Mont Saint-Michel, idyllic looking location. And that is where Wally King was shot down by Germans. Wally King says that, yes, there are movies that he believes sometimes glamorize war, but he says war is not glamorous.
If I have any criticism of wartime movies, they're glamorous. There's always a happy ending, and that's not what war's about. War is just dirty, ugly business. It's not something you don't want to do, but it's necessary to do.
Tom, there's not a person in Normandy, and I'm talking even young people, that do not recognize what happened here 78 years ago. Even children coming up to the D-Day veterans, calling them heroes, saying thank you. D-Day, it changed the world. Tom?
Carrie, thank you very much. If you walk those beaches or that cemetery, it will change you forever. Hallie Jackson will be back tomorrow. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.